Alright, this is Mary Mackert, tape 1. Why don't you just start off telling your story?
My name is Mary Mackert, and I was born and raised in polygamy, and every generation on my mother's side has lived polygamy, down to and including me. I was the 6th out of 7 wives to my husband. And for 16 years I lived the polygamous lifestyle, obedient to my husband. Gave up great big pieces of myself to live according to the dictates of the religion, and in being submissive and obedient and sweet and loving to my sister wives, and it was a very difficult way to live, though every day I told myself it will get better. It can't get worse, it's got to get better. We've got to go uphill from here. And gave birth to 5 sons, and raised them in a lot of respects to believe the same things I'd been taught to believe. And I got to the point where I realized that in that situation I had no advocate. I had no one who would hear my pleas and defend me. And because my husband, who was supposed to be my best friend, had other best friends. He had other women that he had to please too and keep happy. And I found that at times he even pitted us against each other. And there were times he would tell me to do one thing, and then when I was criticized by another wife for doing it, he told her, well, you know, Mary, I can't tell her what to do. She does as she damn well pleases. And when those words fell on my ears, I was so heartsick and discouraged that I wanted to leave. I felt like it was a great betrayal, because I had spent 14 of the 16 years walking on eggshells, doing whatever he asked me to do, eating crow, looking like the bad guy to the other women. But when he didn't appreciate that, then I was through. And as I contemplated those things, I sunk into a deep depression. For 2 years, I could hardly eat. I could hardly sleep. I lost a lot of weight. I was down to 112 pounds, and I hadn't weighed that since I was in 5th grade. And my mother saw me at a funeral I went to. My nephew had died, and I was allowed to go to his funeral. I mean allowed. We didn't go places like that, and my husband allowed me to go. And my mother saw me and she said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Put on my happy smile, do my pretending, you know, everything's wonderful. And I says, "Why do you ask?" She looked really strange at me, you know, when I said, "I'm fine." And she says, "You just look so gaunt. Have you been sick?" "Oh, no, I'm just fine." And, you know, these little chubby cheeks that my grandpa used to grab a hold of and say, "Oh, those little squirrel cheeks," were gone. They sunk in. Like I was sucking my cheeks in like that. I was so thin. And yet, nothing was wrong. Nothing was wrong. And at home, my husband would almost make fun of me, almost mock. He called it vanity. "You're so vain," because he thought I was deliberately not eating to lose weight, and it was a vanity thing. And nothing could be farther from the truth. I'd start to eat, and it's like my throat would close up, and I couldn't swallow. I couldn't swallow. And it was another disheartening thing, that here I am suffering this way, and he's totally oblivious of it. And I'm almost chastised for it, for what I'm going through. And I got so low at one point that I really didn't want to live anymore. But the only thing that kept me going every day was I could not imagine what my children's life would be like without me, because I was their advocate. they would have no advocate if I left. They would only be second best to any of those women, even though they were told, and I was told growing up, that how wonderful polygamy is because you have more than one mother to take care of you. If anything happened to your mother, there were all these other mothers who would take care of you. But I knew better. I knew better. I saw the rivalry between the women, and I saw the way that, you know, women protected their own children and favored their own children like a mama bear does. And, you know, we were, from the pulpits, admonished about the mother bear syndrome, and we were gotten after for that. But it's natural instinct for a mother to care for her own child above any other child. And I struggled and wrestled with this for quite some time. And as I found out God would do, He brought someone into my life who helped me to get away. And I ran into this man. He was my stepbrother. I ran into him in a grocery store that I had shopped at for 10 years, and he had shopped there too, and we'd never run into each other till that day. And he opened his door to me and told me if I wanted to leave that I was welcome to come and stay at his place till I could get on my feet.
He had already left. Yes,
and yeah, he had married my younger sister and had left years before that, and so I took him up on it. I just one day got in the car and drove away, and but I had to leave without my children. And my only regret about leaving was that I couldn't take more people with me. The law gave me a right to my own children, my own biological children, but there were children there that I had raised as though they were my own. And it just ripped my heart out to leave them behind. And these women that I loved and cared for, who over time I found out didn't love and care for me the way I cared for them, my heart aches for them. And I wanted to show them that, you know, there's a wonderful life out there without polygamy. A God-honoring life. A life of joy and peace and happiness that I never experienced in polygamy and never would and never could. And you lived your life every day for a promise of those kind of things in the afterlife that I found the Bible doesn't say you'll ever have if you don't know Christ. And I came to know a Savior who loved me the way I was. And it has helped me to grow to where He wants me to be. And I praise Him because 4 out of 5 of my children know Him in that way, know Him in that intimate way, and have that sweet peace and joy and comfort in knowing that their eternity is secure, that no one can pluck Him out of God's hand, you know. No one can take that away from them. And no experience in life is going to take that away from them. It's eternal security. And I never had that in polygamy. Every day you worried and wondered if you would ever make it, if you could ever work hard enough to be worthy of heaven. But the Bible tells us none of us are worthy of heaven. Only Christ is. And He paid our debt for us and made a way that we could spend eternity with Him. And that is the most precious thing I have. And it brings such joy to the here and now to know that my happily ever after is already taken care of. My eternity began on November 12th, 1989, the day I said, Lord, I can't be good enough for heaven. And I know that You made a way. I know that You died on the cross of Calvary and made it so I could spend eternity with You, and I'm asking You for that gift. Help me to live for You, because I want to be with You forever. And He took care of that for me.
Excellent. Talk a little bit about the group that you're part of. What was it like growing up in that, and what were the what was it like in growing up, and what group was it, and so forth?
I grew up in what is now known as the FLDS. I was born down in what is known as Colorado City. It was called Short Creek back then. We were crickers. We were proud that we were crickers and plig kids, we were the pligs. And we became proud of the banner, the persecution that we suffered under. We just boasted of it rather than feel bad about it. At least that was the front that we put up. And children in polygamy, the number of children in a family far outnumber the adults. And I don't think we realized the power we had till we were teenagers. Because we learned how to cover for each other, and to get away with things, and it was, I think, unique to any other family. You had siblings your own age. My own best friend was my sister, because there weren't, 8 months between us, And in my father's family, there were at least, he always talked about the triplets. There were 3 women who had children, and they, the same year, and so we had a buddy, and we had 2 buddies, and we did a lot of fun things, just by the sheer numbers of us. Kids find fun, and they make fun. It's just the nature of a child. But we also grew up with a lot of fears. Governor Pyle had raided Short Creek, and the sheriff lived right there in town after the raid. We had the National Guard had come in there, and police officers. I grew up with a great fear of policemen because of the raid. And my brother who was born after the raid. My dad had signed papers so he could get out of jail, that he would not live with his plural wives, He would only live with his first and legal wife. And he didn't keep that promise. My brother was evidence of that. And so when he was old enough to go out and play in the yard, it was my job and my sister's job to stand watch. And one of us watched for the sheriff's car, and the other one stayed by the baby. And there was a ditch that my dad had put there in the yard, and we grew corn that you could hide behind. When the corn got tall, you could just lay down. But until the corn grew up, there was no water in that ditch. It was made so you could lay down in it. And there were times when I would hear my sister call out, "Alfonso," that was the name of the sheriff. "Alfonso is coming." And I would grab my little brother. And of course, a 2-year-old doesn't want to stop playing. And he would scream and holler. And I would grab him and run for that ditch and lay in that ditch and covering his mouth to smother his cries. And tears running down my face, I'd say, David, please stop crying. They'll take Daddy to jail. Don't cry, don't cry. And we moved to Salt Lake. By the time I was in 5th grade, we were living in Salt Lake. And I was 13 years old before I met a police officer that didn't frighten me. In school, they were teaching us about officer friendly, and I went, yeah, sure. To you, maybe. I wasn't buying it. There was no officer friendly in my life. And but I had a dog that a police officer was coming home after his shift one day and turned the corner and hit my dog. And he picked her up, and she was bleeding internally, blood coming out of her nose, but she was still alive. And he came to the house and knocked on the door and offered to pay her vet bills. And Mom declined it, but when he left, I turned to my mom and said, he was so nice. I was totally amazed at the kindness of this man who wore the badge, because that had not been my experience. He was the enemy. And so things started to change, and there were some questions in my mind about what I'd been told, led to believe.
Concerning the outside world.
Yeah, concerning, everything out there. I was, when I started junior high, I had learned how to sew at a really young age, and so I advanced really fast in the home economics classes they had, and by the time I was a senior in high school, I was in such an advanced class, we were sewing men's suits, and so as soon as I learned how to sew, I was asking for fabric to sew, and I remember my mother saying, "Are you sure you need that many yards to make that skirt?" Well, of course I did, because I was making a mini skirt to go underneath the long skirt. And I would dress in the morning and put my mini skirt on underneath the long skirt and start walking down the street. And pretty soon the long skirt would come off, and they weren't really mini skirts. I just wanted something that was a little bit more fashionable than down to the ankles, and mini skirts were in style, and the dress code at school was, when you knelt on the floor, the hem of your skirt had to touch the floor. That's all I wanted, And but one day I was busted. My mother forgot something when she headed out for work and turned around to come back to get it and saw me walking down the street in my short skirt, and I was in trouble. But there was that little spirit of rebellion going on even back then, and there's a guy on the basketball team. I liked him a whole lot. It was just like, forbidden fruit. We just couldn't go there, But I had lots of dreams and desires and things I wanted, and as I got to where I was, as early as 15, the pressure started for me to marry, and people were saying, "Oh, you're so spiritually mature. I just know you're going to marry at a really young age," and I had all the cooking and cleaning and housework kind of things, how to run a house down, because my mom worked, and I was the oldest, and I took care of things while she was at work, so you mature quickly when it's thrown on you like that,
How did you feel about the idea of early marriage? I mean, did you have any kind of romantic notions about what marriage would be like, or did you kind of dread that? Or
well, I had lots of romantic notions about marrying a young man, but I didn't ever imagine that I would marry an old man until my older sister, who was married to Roy Johnson. She married him when she was 18 and he was 72. He was the leader of the polygamous group. And she became St. Carol. She could do no wrong. She was lifted up not only in the community as an example, but in our family. And when I wanted to marry my stepbrother, who was like the only guy I could get close enough to get to know, other than my brothers, and you can't marry them. So it was like... she invited me to go down when I was on the Christmas break from school, to go down to Colorado City and stay with her for a while. And it was when I was down there that rumors started circulating that I had married Roy Johnson, that I was his newest wife. And when that got back to me, I was just terrified and went to my mother just in tears. I could hardly tell her what was my problem for sobbing, And she just reassured me that if I felt that strongly about it, that I wouldn't have to marry him,
So you did have some kind of choice.
Some kind of choice. And in fact, the man I married, when I went to see Roy Johnson to find out who I was to be placed with for marriage, it was, he sent me home to pray about it and to get revelation. Well, my dad had done a very subtle thing, but it was very powerful in that when I was having the problem with my length of skirt, Bill Draper, the man I married, was the man who taught the fireside classes. If you were 15 years old and not married, you were invited to go to fireside classes. And my brothers used to call him the head honcho in charge of talking little girls into marrying old men. And that was what was pushed in those classes, was plural marriage, and of course younger girls marrying older men, and it was lifted up and touted as being, so pleasing to God, and so there was a lot of that propaganda going on in those classes I attended, and so my dad, when I had the problem with the skirt, he says, I've said everything I can say to you, and the brethren have placed Bill Draper over the young people to instruct them, and maybe he can say something that'll make a difference. And I was encouraged to go and talk to him. And basically he just, the counsel he gave me was that I needed to find out who it was I really wanted to please. And of course I wanted to please God. And then by their definition, pleasing God meant doing what the brethren tell you to do. And so when I went home to pray, I didn't have to pray. And the God I worshiped wouldn't have answered anyway. But my upbringing and the teaching and the instruction that my father would turn over his parental authority to this other man to direct his child spoke volumes. I'd never known him to do that before. And so when I was asked, I said Bill Draper was the man I should marry. And it was a lot of agony I went through over that. I was in love with my stepbrother. They'd sent him away on a work mission down to Colorado City. When I went down there for the Christmas break, I thought I'd get to see him. That's why I agreed to go down there, because I thought I'd get to see him. And I got down there and found out they had sent him to Salt Lake the same time they brought me down. And when I was headed back to Salt Lake, it's like I could hardly wait to get back in hopes of just seeing him before he went back down to Colorado City. And the people I got the ride with were pressing to take me over to my mother's. And I said, oh, no, Mama Rini lives right here in Sandy. And that's the first one of my dad's wives' houses that you came to as we came in, and that was his mother. And I knew if he was in town, he'd be there. And so I talked him into leaving me there and found out he had left just moments before I arrived. And I was just so heartsick and so devastated, and I could tell, I knew there was no way they would let me marry him. And so I just decided that I needed to please God and not myself. And so I went to Roy Johnson's office and told him that Bill Draper was the man that God had revealed to me that I should marry.
Now, did you believe that God had revealed that to you, or did you just...
No. I don't think I ever once prayed that. But my father, I knew it would please my father. I knew that it would please, Roy Johnson. In fact, it was said when weeks passed without any confirmation from Roy Johnson or anything, it was, and I got worried about it. And I asked my dad, he went and talked to Uncle Roy, they called him, and he came back and he says, there's not a problem. He says, it isn't often that a young lady asks to marry an older man, and they're going to go ahead with it. Just some other things have to be taken care of first. Well, I found out Roy Johnson was giving his daughter to Bill Draper, and that he was going through marrying her right now. And so I had to wait a little while till that was taken care of, and then we went ahead. But no, it was all about pleasing my dad, pleasing my mom, pleasing the brethren, and
that in your mind, that was pleasing God?
Yes. And in that mind, yeah, in my mindset, that was pleasing to God, for me to be obedient to the authorities He set in my life and to let them totally dictate. Those were the things that were preached across the pulpit. And more recently, as I was approaching these decisions, even in our family religious services, the Sunday schools my dad held, it was all about finding out who has a right to rule in your life. We were each to take that question to God and come out with an answer of who has the right to rule in our life. Totally has dominion over everything in our life. And of course the answer always is your priesthood authority has the right to rule in your life. So that my father had the right to rule, and he had done things that pointed me right to Bill Draper. Bill Draper was the right-hand man to the prophet. He was considered a business tycoon in the community. He lived a secretive life, so no one knew much about his family. I asked my mother, how many wives does he have? And she didn't even know. Does he have children? Well, yes, I believe he's got children, because I wanted to have children. And I didn't want to marry into a family where I wouldn't be able to have children. And so the appeal to me at naming Bill Draper was it would please my dad. I would be able to have children. And I could live a secretive life where I would never have to face my stepbrother and say, I don't love you, I've married someone else. I would never have to look him in the eye and say that. And so those were the things that motivated me to move that direction.
Who was God to you then in this? I mean, what was God like in your, as you were processing this?
Well, a lot of children, when we're born, we are so tiny and dependent that a lot of children define God by their parents. So the God in my life, my dad's full German, and in the German culture, no news is good news. If you didn't hear from my dad, it was good. If you heard from him, you knew you were in trouble. And so the God I knew was a lightning bolt that would strike me dead if I did the wrong thing. And as long as I didn't hear from God, it was good news. You know? Everything was going fine as long as I didn't hear from God. And so that's how I defined God, in the same way my father was with me. And I was afraid of him. He had all the power, and I had none. He had all the say-so, and I had none. It was not a God I wanted to be near. It was not a God that really loved and cared about me. It was all about what I would do for him. And
it wasn't done out of love, it was done just to keep him off your back, essentially?
A lot of that, you know, you want to stay out of his way. My dad could be terrifying. And so could my God. I experienced, I'd gone out to the farm one summer to help take care of the kids out there for one of my moms. And my stepbrother was out there. And we were doing a little bit of sneaking around. And I'd gone up to the head gate where they shut off the irrigation water to tell my brothers to get back for the meal that was being served. And when I went up there, there was a big storm that was brewing. And before I could get home, this horrendous storm that just laid wheat fields flat hit. Hail, just driving rain. It just soaked and drenched us. And he and I were walking back together. And there came a point where the lightning and thunder was so bad, we laid in a ditch to make sure we wouldn't be hit by the lightning and thunder. And he laid over on top of me to protect me from the hail that was just beating down and just hurting when it would hit us. It was beating so hard. And that was God. He was after me. I was terrified. I was in big trouble, and I knew it, and I was scared.
Talk about leading up to your wedding and what you were going through there.
The night of my wedding was the saddest day of my life. A wedding's supposed to be a joyous occasion, but, you know, I would have rather gone to a funeral. It was, I felt like I was betrayed by my parents. Here I was going to marry this man I just barely knew and would never see my family again. I mean, I not only just barely knew him, you know, I didn't love him. I knew so little about him, and was giving up all my brothers, all my sisters, my family as I knew it, and going to who knows what. And as I prepared that night and got in the car with my parents and had said goodbye to my siblings, and we were driving over to Uncle Roy's house for the wedding ceremony, this horrible storm began to brew. And the skies got so dark. And I, you know, limbs were snapping off trees, and I wanted some big tree to fall right down on our car and just kill me. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this. But I felt like I had no voice and no say, and that I would be an embarrassment to my dad if I backed out of this now. And I just pleaded with God. I wanted to die. I didn't want to do this. And he didn't kill me. and the tree didn't fall on the car, and we made it there, and now I was really stuck. And the more I waited, the harder it would be to back out. And I just took a big deep breath and just said, you know, you gotta keep moving forward, you gotta keep moving forward, you know. And so I went ahead and made those vows. And I got in the car with my husband in a little box of clothes that I later had to get rid of. In living his secretive lifestyle, it's like everything that has anything to do with your past has to go away, so that your loyalties will be to him. And he didn't like to hear me talk about, and in fact I got chastised for talking so much about my family, my mother and my father and my brothers and my sisters, and he didn't want to hear about it, and he didn't want me talking to the other women about it. But I mean, what am I supposed to talk about? I have no history with them. And it's part of getting to know a person. It's like, I think back on it now and go, they didn't really want to get to know me. And I look at it like, you know, I'm this individual, but they're going to shove me into this cookie cutter mold, and that's what I'm supposed to be, what they want me to be, instead of what God created me to be. And he changed totally how I did my hair, the clothes I wore. Even one time he told me I laughed too loud. And so I had to kind of subdue all those things that were me to make them fit what he wanted me to be instead of what I was. And so as stifling as I thought growing up as a child was, being in a marriage was even more stifling. And it's not that there was anything wrong about how I was. It was just not what he wanted. So I had to change to be meek and demure and soft-spoken and
sweet.
Yeah, all that.
And I mean, and I realize you can't paint everything with a broad brush, but would you consider that a pretty typical scenario in most of the marriages in the FLDS?
Well, most of the marriages are not lived in secret. In fact, you know, when you talk to women who didn't have a secretive lifestyle, they call those that followed that Musserites. If you weren't a Musserite, it's like you were part of a community where everybody knew who you were married to and how many kids you had, and you could share the joys of, you know, an expectant child on the way and things like that. Even within our family, my family, Bill Draper's family, I couldn't tell another wife that I was pregnant until I was showing, until it was obvious. You just didn't say anything. And those were the rules. And so, you know, I waited 2 years before I was pregnant with my first child. And I got married to have children. So it wasn't that I wasn't trying to have children. It just took that long for me to get pregnant with my first child. And I tell you, those 2 years were so trying for me because I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. And by the time I really got the courage to leave, I found out I was pregnant and felt like I couldn't. I was now trapped. And the bondage of my motherhood was now going to keep me there. And it was difficult not to have a friend to talk to about those things and to share that joy with. And I remember saying to my husband when I told him I was pregnant, and I says, I just want to go shout it from the rooftops. And he goes, "Don't you dare." Like I really would, you know. Just telling him how I felt, you know. And he just couldn't relate. So, but... and
I realize this is also kind of a broad question, but what were your attitudes towards polygamy? Did you have an opinion about polygamy even beforehand, or was it just simply something that was what it was?
When you say beforehand, tell me.
Before you got married.
Before I got married?
Before you got married.
Before I got married, you know, my experience about polygamy had to do with the things I observed. And, you know, children watch everything. And, you know, you get told one thing and you see another. And that was definitely my experience. I get told about how the love that the sister wives have for each other is just the greatest love you can ever imagine. And yet I watched the rivalry between my mothers, the problems they had. And though they try to hide that, you pick up on it, you know. And there were times when my mother would be so angry at my dad. I mean, he'd be sitting there in front of the TV watching his football game and eating his big bowl of ice cream, and she's in the kitchen slamming cupboard doors. Every door she opens gets shoved with an extra exuberance. And I remember saying to her, "What's wrong, Mom?" And she went, "Nothing. Nothing. Nothing's wrong. Nothing was ever wrong. But you knew there were problems." And I just, you know, you kind of weighed all that. And you know, the favorite line is, well, if it's lived right, you know, if it's lived right, it's just the greatest thing, you know, that you can experience in this life.
Did you ever see it lived right?
Never. Never saw it lived right.
No example of any happy polygamist family?
Well, I saw them on TV with their little bright, shiny, smiley faces saying how happy they were, and I go, yeah, denial's your drug of choice too. Because I lived that. I know. I knelt at the side of my bed and begged God to take those jealous feelings from me, and those angry feelings toward my sister, and to help me love her the way I was supposed to love her. And just you get to where you get weary of it. And what happened with me, my experience was that over time I buried my feelings. And the interesting thing is you can't bury just the bad feelings. The good ones go with it too. And so my husband used to say to me, he says, "You're my steady Eddie. You're so even keel, you have no high highs and no low lows." That's because I had no feelings. And it took me years of counseling to connect the event and the emotion. Because something would happen that would upset me. 2 months later, I would be upset and not know why. I couldn't figure it out. And I just buried those things so deep that they didn't surface. They didn't rear their ugly head until long after the event had taken place. And while it's going on, I'm just sweet and smiling through the whole thing, you know. And then one day I'm raging and I don't know where this anger comes from. And it took counseling to walk me back and match the event with the emotion. And now you step on my toe and I'll push you off and get after you real good. You know, I'm in touch. I'm in touch with my feelings, you know. And my older children who grew up with me out of touch think their mother is the biggest PMSing woman on the planet. And my youngest one who grew up with me connected to my emotions goes, "Come on, guys." She, you know, you step on somebody's toe, they say, "Ouch," you know, this is normal. It's okay.
But yeah, they weren't used to having...
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that that's just the robotic... whatever the cassette says in there.
They're regurgitating what they've heard over and over and over again. There's a saying, you know, you say it loud enough and long enough, it becomes truth. Yeah. And so... you know, been there, done that. Understand it a lot better now. And, yeah. And it's a wonderful life when you're connected with your feelings, because those good ones are well worth the bad ones. The good feelings are wonderful. And,
so, I mean, do you recognize that now when you see it on the faces of the women that you know are still trapped in polygamy? Do you...
There's a deadness in the eyes of anyone who doesn't know Jesus Christ. Period. And when you come to know Him, there is there's something different in you because Christ lives in you, and you glow. I call it a glow. And every Christian that I know, I'll meet people and not even know they're Christian, and it's like they got the glow. They got the glow on, you know, because they know Him and He just radiates from you. And they've got a dead religion, and there's no glow. They have no hope. And you can see it in their eyes. And though the words come out of their mouth, the belief is not in the heart of what they're saying. There's an emptiness to it. That because I have walked in those shoes, it tugs at my heart, and I hurt. I literally hurt in my chest for them, that Christ doesn't live in their heart, that He hasn't filled every cavity, every nook and little cranny of the heart, you know, until He just spills out. And I ache for them to know Him that way, because the problem is not with polygamy. The problem's with the heart. They have heart problem. Christ is not the center of their heart. He doesn't fill up their heart to overflow. Their works, empty, dead works that produce nothing. Nothing that has anything to do with eternity. And as sweet as the smile is on their face and the words that come out of their mouth, there's an emptiness in those eyes that I just want to take them and say, let me show you my best friend. He can change that for you. He can get you past the circumstances of life and give you a joy that's beyond comprehension. He can fill up that emptiness, and that loneliness He can take away. And you don't have to go through this alone and afraid and worried about eternity. Because He'll take care of all that for you. He loves you that much, if you just let Him. And if that Christ has their heart, all the rest of that will take care of itself.
Falls into place.
Yeah.
That's a great word. That's an absolute great word. And that's precisely the message that we want to communicate to them. I mean, It's not about we're going to reach down and bash you over the head because of your lifestyle, because of your religion. If Christ can get into there, then all of that is going to take care of itself.
And you know, I've had preachers say, well, what would happen if a polygamous man got saved? Glory to God.
Yeah.
You know, the same Holy Spirit that lives in you and I would live in him, and God would tell him what to do about those two wives.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to fix that. When there's a heart change, God takes care of all the rest.
Yeah, that's a message that I really wish I could get to most Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, that worry about as if Jesus really is not capable.
You know, there's a man down there in Colorado City, and I don't know if he's still alive because it's been 10 years since I talked to him. And the kids are all grown, and it's just him and the two wives. And though he doesn't believe polygamy anymore, he said, I made a vow to both these women. And if I break it to one of them, I'm going to have to answer to God. I made a vow. And there have been Christian preachers of the word come and talk to him. And he says, well, what would I have to do to go to your church? And they say, you'd have to get rid of one of your wives. So he won't. He's going to miss eternity because some Christian won't let him come to church because he has two wives. That breaks my heart. That just is gut-wrenching. That this man will spend eternity in hell because a Christian said, you have to get rid of one of your wives before you can come to church. God didn't say that. God didn't say you got to clean your act up before I'll save you. He said, just as I am, without one plea. You come to him just as you are, with nothing to give. And God does it all. It's a gift to be received. Not one to be earned. Not one without conditions. That only the condition is that you believe. Believe what God said and trust him for it. And you have it. It's that simple.
What doctrines were particularly I'm not even sure whether important is the right word or meaningful, but which ones do you think most shaped your life besides the doctrine of plural marriage as you grew up, and in terms of the day-to-day impact on your life?
Yeah. Oh, Scott, polygamy was so all-consuming. The living, and it's so hard to live it right. You going to church on a regular basis. I mean, in my home as a child growing up, I know I had learned to play the piano, and I love hymns. I'm not real into secular music at all. I love hymns. And so we had hymn books, and in the hymn book was The Old Rugged Cross. And I fell in love with that song. I played it, I sang it. The words were on my lips all the time. And my dad used to just turn to me. I'm sure it just brought such conviction that he would say, "Don't you know any other song?" And I'd want to say, "Nope." The only song I know, The Old Rugged Cross. And my sister and I would harmonize and sing it together. And to this day, I mean, I can hardly sing that song without tears running down my face, because he totally missed it. He totally missed it. And it shows me that every man is without excuse. He was under conviction just with that simple little song, and rejected, rejected, rejected. And yet, I hid it in my heart, and one day, God showed up and says, "I have a gift for you. Will you receive it?"
But where do you see the workings of God? I mean, that's a great example. Where do you see the workings of God, even in your early life, in terms of preparing your heart, your attitude? Because I mean, I know you say that God, as far as you viewed him, was just a monster that you tried to stay out of his way.
Right.
But so how did this monster manage to break through and show you who he really was?
Well, I had to get really desperate before I would see the God that really was. I was, my brother said, the most devout of all his sisters. It was how he labeled me. I wanted to do what was right. And it was sorting out what was right, you know, and had so many influences pulling me one way or the other to defining what was right. And so I left polygamy and decided that no one was going to tell me what was right or wrong. That I was just going to do whatever I wanted and hang it all, you know? And for 4 years of my life, I pretty much lived like the devil. I was going to do whatever felt good, whatever I wanted, and get out of my way. Because God hasn't struck me dead yet, and if he does, oh well, you know? Kind of that attitude. And I had to get to a point where the hardness in my heart could soften toward God again. And I had met, you know, I was struggling to raise 5 sons alone, and my boys were getting in a lot of horrible trouble. And I was at a loss to how to rein them in and help turn their lives around. And there were days I thought they would have done better if they'd been left in polygamy, you know, protected like calves in a stall, they called it, you know, and they'd been just thrown out into the world and were spiraling down, and it was frightening. And I got my boys involved in football, manly sport. My dad had played it. They needed a man to look up to. You know, it takes a man to teach a boy how to become a man. And I couldn't do it as much as I wanted to, because I'm a woman. I don't understand men the way a man understands another man and a boy. And I felt if they got someone in their life who would mentor them. And one of my son's football coaches was single. He was a Christian, and we dated for a short period of time. And strangest dating experience I'd had. The guy had opened his Bible and want to read to me. And I thought, oh my. Some days I'd just roll my eyes and go, here we go again. But he was cute. And, you know, women put up with a lot of hokey when they're cute. But he just, he tried to share the gospel with me. And I wasn't real open to this, you know. And in his frustration, one day he told me Mormons were devil worshippers. And I went ballistic. It made me so angry. And I threw things at him and called him nasty names. See, I was in touch with my feelings now. He heard it. And when he was a police officer, so when I calmed down, he was experiencing domestic violence. And when I calmed down enough that he could reason with me, he said, go to the library, check out a book on Satanic Worship, go look at the symbols on their temples, and then tell me that they don't worship the devil. So I had an assignment, and I was going to prove him wrong, and I went down to the library, and I found a book on Satanic Worship. And I believe they're evil, and I wouldn't take it home. But I sat there in that library, and I opened up that book, and I didn't have to go look on their temples because I'd sewn my husband's temple garments and sewn the marks into them. And those marks and those meanings were identical. And God had my attention. And my friend had given me some gospel tracts, and I went home and searched around the house trying to find them, and I finally found one. On the back of it was the address of Mountainside Baptist Church. And I decided I was going to go check this out. Now you got to understand where I came from. I was told, lightning bolt will come from heaven and strike you dead, and you'll be a tar spot on the sidewalk if you ever enter anything that's not Mormon. So it was with fear and trembling that day I went in and sat through those services. And I literally felt like a child, a starving child at a banquet table. I could not stuff my face fast enough. I'd never heard the Bible like that before in my life. And I showed up from that day, showed up to every service, was there early. They had to shove me out the doors and lock them so I'd go home. I didn't want to leave. And yet, I didn't want to walk that aisle and ask Jesus to save me either. I'd had enough with a religion, and I didn't want any more. And I saw it as another religion. And so 3 times the pastor came by my house after I started visiting that church and wanted to lead me to the Lord, and I'd make my little excuses and send him on his way. On November 12th, 1989, in the quiet of my room, I prayed, and praying was not unusual for me. I did believe in God. And I told God that night that I knew I couldn't be good enough to earn heaven. That Jesus Christ had shed sinless blood on the cross of Calvary to pay the sin debt of the world, and I asked God if he'd take that blood and apply it to my sin debt.